Earlier today, I did something on my main channel. You guys know Ken Knows. This is for Ken Knows Deluxe. We actually talked about like the whole situation that's going on with like basically Vivian and just basically what happened with Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, because people are losing their mind. There were videos about this years ago, and I saw this video. I guess it's somebody that re-uploaded it, but just like my other video was like basically a beehive. I guess this is gonna get people upset. But sadly, facts make people lose their mind. I don't know why. It's just how it goes.
Try typing Vivian's name into Google Images and see the sort of things that pop up. The curves of their shadowy figure have...
Let me just say this. Gardevoir, Sonic the Hedgehog are the last two things that you ever Google. There was a time in this world where it was very unsafe to do any of those. Oh, Vaporeon, as I've learned from some of you freaks.
Certainly fueled at least some fantasies, but perhaps all isn't quite what it seems to be. Originally a member of the Wicked Shadow Sirens, she gets fed up with taking abuse from her sisters and leaves the gang, teaming up with Mario as a playable character to instead fight for the good guys. Yeah, she gets fed up, but I wouldn't...
Favorite character in the game, by the way.
If you've ever heard the rumour that, behind her feminine ways, Vivian is actually a boy. But how can this be? Nowhere in the English script does she get referred to as anything but a female, with absolutely no room for any interpretation on this fact. Heck, she even gets called Mario's girlfriend at one point. Well, let's take a look at the original Japanese version and see if
what
that
do you mean?
clears up the confusion. The first thing to point out is that the group are only called the Shadow Sirens in the English release, with all other versions, including European translations, doing away with the female siren part and instead using the term trio. This means nothing by itself, of course, although as soon as we start to dig deeper, the situation drastically changes. Take this scene for example. So Vivian dares to call her and her sisters the Three Shadow Beauties. This angers the other girls and she gets slammed with insults, calling her things like ugly. The Japanese version on the other hand has Vivian call the group the Three Shadow Sisters, which also leads to her getting screamed at, but this time it's to remind Vivian that she's an otoko, written in red katakana for emphasis. Yes, otoko does in fact mean boy. So there's one case where the original Japanese release...
Yo, some of y'all don't need pens, bro. I'm gonna be honest with you, some of y'all don't need pens. Like, we must take away pens from people. It just has to be stopped. It has, some of you guys don't need pens.
This calls her a male, but let's dig even deeper. Taking the same scene, but from the French translation, and now we have the word garçon standing out in red letters, and garçon again means boy. So Vivian's sisters sometimes
it's literally a pun.
Supposedly really being a male, and this difference can be found in Japan as well as France and even some other European regions. What does her party description say though? In English it simply states that she's one of the Shadow Sirens, and that they suffer from a bit of an inferiority complex. Although over in Japan it can be translated to a member of the Shadow Trio. Vivian may look like a girl, but is actually a boy. There you go, in no uncertain terms she is described as looking like a girl, but actually being a boy. The Beastry further adds to this. The English description just reads, that's Vivian, she's the youngest of the three Shadow Sirens, whereas the Japanese version is, name's Vivian, one of the Shadow Trio and the youngest sister, or rather the youngest brother. Again clearly stating that they are a male and a brother, rather than the youngest sister. The truth is, yes, Vivian is really a boy who identifies as being a girl, and unless you're playing it in English, this fact isn't even disguised, with even European versions bluntly informing players of her true gender. The sad reality is that Nintendo probably felt her transgender nature was too inappropriate for English regions. In fact, Vivian was censored again a few years later in Super
It's like whatever at the end of the day.
Catch card. The card's description makes no mention of her true gender, whilst over in Japan it is explicitly revealed once more, the key phrase being otokonoko, which again means boy. Perhaps it's time for us to put Nintendo on the spot about this, and try and get them to own up to their whitewashing once and for all. And hey, perhaps next time we see Vivian, it'll be under very different circumstances.
Yeah, it's just like whatever at this point, like it always has been. But I will say this, as long as somebody feels like they're being represented, it doesn't really matter, because as a black person, like, we look to other characters for like representation. Knuckles, Piccolo. We're not saying that like we think that they are absolutely black or whatever it is, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's just like, I think was somebody explained, what was it? My Life as a Teenage Robot, where like a lot of transgender people like, you know, actually look to that show as being like, oh wow, that's like something that they relate to. And then the writer was just like, oh yeah, people like relate to this. Okay. Like that's really dope. And that's all it really is that if somebody can find a way that they feel like they can relate to something, I feel like that's not a big deal at the end of the day, in my opinion. Especially as somebody that like understands that, in my opinion, just for how you look at like certain things for different characters that I've named just in general. So sad to say, people will never really like just leave certain situations alone. I've talked about that at length, and I will always speak up for it, sadly, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. And I think that if somebody finds some like, I don't know, hope in it, cool.